Hi everybody, my name is Armando Lopez and I'm the General Manager at the DC Arts Center. Today we're really happy to have Gary Honig with us. He has a show currently in our Nano gallery called A Native Son. So today Gary will be talking to us about his artwork, his practice, his exhibit here, and we'll have an opportunity at the end to pose questions to the artists. So save your questions till the end or go ahead and write them in our chat. So I'm going to start with an introduction. I'm going to highlight our artist right now on the video. So this is our artist, Gary Honig, currently from his studio. So Gary Honig was born and raised in Washington, D.C., a native son. He has been an active participant in the D.C. arts community since the early 1980s. He worked side by side with fellow artists when the downtown scene was scrappy and the streets were sketchy. He helped develop artist spaces in places like Eckington, Shaw, Capitol Hill, and Blagden Alley. During this time, he operated a residential commercial painting company, which he considers the foundation of his current work. Being a tradesman, he developed multidisciplinary skills that he continues to use to this day. It taught him to think on his feet, problem solve, and to not fear creativity. His education was through the doing and asking questions of his peers. He also experienced a life in parallel, working in and around the music business. He has logged his 10,000 hours backstage from juke joints to giant arenas. It is the way musicians go about doing business that informs his artistic profession, rather than how artists typically work within the art industry. There is a distinction that he may share with us this evening. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome Gary Honig.
Hi, Armando.
Hi Gary, how's it going?
Very good. Glad to be here. Thank you for DCAC for inviting me to show in the gallery. I'm humbled and very thankful for the opportunity.
Yeah, we're very happy to have you. Thank you. So Gary, in your in the descriptions of your artwork, you talk about your trade and your experience as a residential and commercial painter. So I assume this is like painting houses and buildings and that kind of thing?
Correct. Basically all manner of things, inside and out. It was about 10 to 12 years of around DC, painting all kinds of different situations, and eventually led to me kind of falling in with a group of artists that were doing a renovation, kind of rebuild of Eckington School in Eckington for Charlie Slichter and Suzanne Cody. And that was kind of my informal introduction to the DC art scene, kind of hanging out with all these people, working on this old schoolhouse, and it eventually led to more and more buildings that we worked on. But essentially, that's kind of when I first started rubbing elbows with kind of what I consider my peers at the time.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's really interesting. And how has that influenced the artwork you're making now?
It influenced it in a way where I had a lot of experience with material and the tactile use of material and how materials work with each other. And of course, with carpentry skills, building my own stretchers and stretching canvas, etc. So there was a parallel time of kind of using my construction skills and then morphing that into deciding I wanted to start creating art.
Mm-hmm. Great. And so you also mentioned in the writing the influence of the music industry on your artwork, particularly the way musicians work and how you feel it, the way they are used to operating within the arts informs your practice. Could you please talk about this a bit more?
Sure. I have always felt as an outsider in the art industry. Over the many, many years that I'm doing this, I've found that people that had nothing to do with the art industry really enjoyed my work, while people that were within the industry, gallery owners or curators, were just kind of non-committal. They really weren't, they didn't say they liked it, they didn't say they didn't like it, they just were nothing. And so I started to understand that the way a musician goes about creating and what their impulse and intent is started to become I started to motivate myself in that direction. I wanted to kind of come up with things that made me happy and made me feel like I was advancing. And so I wasn't really looking to the outside to kind of validate what I was doing. I was just doing what I felt I wanted to do. And found that I had, like I said, a significant amount of response from people that really didn't know any better, which didn't bother me. And then it kind of morphed into understanding that in the music industry, when you decide to do a song or you do some sort of album or you're promoting or you're trying to get a gig at a club or whatever, there were certain elements of that trajectory that I could relate to. It was kind of something that I knew about and felt, oh, I have resonance with how these people, these creative people, go about what they're doing. As opposed to the art side of it, which never really invited me to become a part of it. And so I was kind of left with, well, I'm involved with these people and I get how they're doing it. So I'm kind of more in tune to what they do and how they do it than this side, the art side, which never really kind of let me in the front door to experience what it's like to show in galleries and find collectors and do all the normal things that artists do when they're building some sort of resume, let's say. And so I kind of just kept going as I found more outlets and success in the way I was doing it. I kind of didn't fight trying to do it the way other people tried to do it. So that's kind of where it left me. So I have shown, I've had solo shows, and it was always a situation where I paid for the wall and I could do whatever I want. So, I mean, I've done that, and I've been doing that for years.
Mm-hmm. Oh.
And that kind of, gives you some sort of control over what's actually happening. But I kind of missed the whole, what I'm experiencing right now with DCAC, which is the kind of helpful promotion that kind of is the add-on. You have an audience and you're promoting me and your audience. I kind of missed that throughout this whole 30 years of doing this. And probably if I had to do it again, it would have been helpful to have something.
Mm-hmm. You also mentioned or I guess the person who wrote this text about you, um, mentions musical influences such as Hendrix and the band Cream. Can you talk about how the music relates to your artwork, if it does?
Well, um, I was born in 1954, which is the first year that Elvis Presley recorded an album. And so I'm definitely a child of the 60s, and my formative years were in the late 60s, early 70s. And so all of that birthing of what we call rock and roll was a very integral part of my life. I wouldn't say per se that I would put on a Hendrix album and start painting what I interpret that particular song to be as kind of a very purposeful way of creating a piece of art. I don't really listen to the music I grew up and still love as a way of kind of an influence to the actual act of painting. So it's more of a building a life of art where the experiences that I've had over my whole lifetime kind of influence where my brain is going with the kind of the result that ends up on a canvas. So that might have to do with the color or the feeling, the movement that I'm trying to express, but it has more to do with me and my mental state than it does any particular song or music that I'm listening to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's interesting. I've heard dancers describe their process in a similar way. Well, that's a nice lead into our exhibition here at DCAC, because you actually did take some inspiration from some other media, in particular Richard Wright's book, A Native Son.
So for me, when I'm painting, sometimes the title and the picture have something to do with each other, and sometimes not. And when it doesn't, I'm really focused on kind of incorporating another aspect of my wholeness in the way I choose particular titles for the work that I do. In this case, these 10 paintings I did specifically for this show. And I was trying to come up with, okay, well, I need to do a bunch of titles for this show and these paintings. And I had done this in the past, and I had kind of stolen this from the history behind this. Is William Burroughs, the beat writer, that infamous character. He's famous for having taken bits of words from books and things to create his own books. And then that kind of extrapolated to David Bowie, taking William Burroughs' idea. And David Bowie would actually take books and articles and cut up the words on pages and put them together and actually created the lyrics to his songs. So this is not an idea I came up with. This is something that was in my mind that, okay, I'm going to steal these guys' idea. I've actually done this a couple of times already, so this was not something new that I've done. But for this particular show, I chose the Richard Wright book. It's the Richard Wright book, Native Son. There is no A. I've added the A for the show. It is Native Son. And I picked it because a lot of my titles of my work are topical. They have something to do with, what might be in the air, what might be kind of part of the zeitgeist of the time. And so I picked this book, Native Son, And I had read it obviously in high school, but had not really been, it was new to me to kind of read through it again. But I did know that in the 1940s, when Richard Wright wrote the book, it was very controversial. And James Baldwin came out with a very searing answer to the book. And there were a lot of people that were very upset because Richard Wright, the book is about Billy Thomas, who ends up killing two women. And it's a tragic story, but what really caught me by reviewing the book and picking out at random words exactly from the book that are now the titles of these 10 pieces, as I was going through it, I got to the kind of towards the end, it's called book one, book two, book three. Towards the end, book three, Bigger Thomas gets a lawyer. The lawyer's name is Max. And there's about 30 pages where Max, the defense attorney, is now trying to defend Bigger Thomas and trying to keep him from being executed, essentially. But if you sit there and read those 30 pages, it's actually phenomenal. The exact language that he used in 1940 is the exact language that you're hearing in the streets right now. Why did his life take that turn? Why did he end up being who he was and what he ended up doing? What was the impulses and things of that nature? And so if you read that, it's quite remarkable how, I guess you could say, how little has changed, because the arguments that this lawyer was making, which is actually Richard Wright who's making that argument because he's the writer of the book, it's the same arguments that are being made now about how unequal and actions were precipitated by reactions to things that were happening to, in this case, a particular character in a book. And so it all kind of dovetailed together, and it was kind of nice how that all happened. So I had already made the paintings, was looking for titles, picked the book, caught this idea of grabbing words from something else, from somebody, somebody else did it. I caught that, and it all kind of came together that way. And so if you actually are very familiar with the book and you read the titles in order, it kind of follows along with what the story is actually telling you. So it's an interesting kind of dynamic that's adds another element to the way that I go about doing my artwork.
Okay. Yeah, the titles are very poetic. One, for example, is called "The Vast White Looming Walls." It's this one that we have a detail of on our postcard. It's actually, this artwork is the vast.
That's when that's when he's actually on the roof of an apartment building. He's been running from the police, and the vast white walls are basically white people kind of caving in on him at this last second when he's about to get apprehended.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's very, very timely. Okay. Well, also, you hung your work in a very particular way in the gallery, because you were telling us you wanted the audience to see it in a certain order. Can you talk more about that?
The 10 paintings, the first 4 of them start out as pretty much a straight painting, as you see. And then as I was doing the show, I started to articulate the paintings in a way that kind of was destroying the the elements of it. And so in the second series of 3 paintings, I sliced them and slightly slid the slices. And so it was a full painting, and then the slices slid just slightly. So if you look at it, it kind of looks like a painting, but it's off, which created another image. And then the last 3, I actually took a painting and then ripped them into pieces, and would take different chunks of the different paintings and kind of collage them together. And so it's a kind of a deconstruction exercise, if you will, of seeing a painting and then deconstructing it along the way and creating something else.
Oh, we have a question from our director, B. Stanley. He says, Gary, congratulations on a great looking show. Question about the scale. The paintings in the Nano gallery are small. Do you make work on that scale, or are they miniatures of larger works?
They are not miniatures of larger works. They're actually what I consider kind of doorway openers. Typically, I'll do something that's a little bit more like this, with larger paintings. And so I have an entire body of work that are larger paintings. I like 5 by 5, 5 foot by 5 foot, 5 foot by 7 foot. Those are the types of paintings that I typically like to do. But these smaller paintings are kind of door openers, like I said. They're ways of kind of getting people, they're small, they're affordable, and they're a way of introducing some of my work to people that might not normally get to see it. So they're kind of either or. They're not, I don't do these small paintings bigger per se, although the techniques are the same. The techniques I use for the small ones, I do bigger.
Oh, okay. They ask, the deconstructed works remind me in a way of Japanese screen paintings. In the end, does that resonate with you at all?
I think it's very typical of abstract painters in general to allow the viewer to interpret what they're seeing the way they want to. I think that there is a school of artists that love to talk about and interpret what they've done for their audience, the viewers. And then there's another school that have this very severe, it is what it is, and it means to you what you want it to mean, and I'm not going to describe it for you. And I lean a little bit towards that group where it is what it is. And I've had lots of people tell me, oh, it looks like, a guy carrying a pail to the mountains or whatever. And that's fine, and I love it. And one of the aspects of abstract art is that it continues to grow on you, and you continue to see things in it over the years that you acquire the painting and have it hanging on your wall. And that's why I paint. I paint for that. I paint for that longevity, for someone to be able to see things that they haven't seen before over time. And I think that I rub elbows with a lot of my colleagues that kind of see that the same way.
Oh, great. We have another question from Elizabeth Driscoll. Has your work or level of creativity been impacted by the pandemic?
I wouldn't say the level of work has been impacted by the pandemic, but it is troubling to all artists who are now faced with the idea that people will only see their art in a kind of two-dimensional digital way. the idea of being a sculptor and never having the person be able to walk around a particular piece seems so foreign. And the same thing with painters. You know, when you see something digitally, you don't see the three-dimensionality of brushstrokes and things, which are a huge component to an artwork. And so I think that artists in general are grappling with this idea of, you know, this is definitely temporary, and how do we deal with it the best we can, because at some point we need people to come back to start looking at live art and enjoying it. Artists in general will do a series of painting, and it won't necessarily all stay together. And so one collector might have a piece from a particular series, and you know, the series might be spread all over the world, and someone in 1972 bought, you know, this particular number 6 of a series of paintings, and that's fairly typical. One of the things that I think about when I'm doing this you know, group of 10 paintings is kind of like an album, you know, to me, like a record album, like 10 songs of an album, and this, you know, might be considered maybe an EP compared to the large paintings I'm doing. Something that's just I kind of did off to the side as opposed to the large paintings I'm doing. So, you know, I don't particularly think they have to stay together. I do have series that I kind of won't sell unless they stay together. But this particular one, they're just paintings, and they're super affordable, and 10 of you should be out there buying them.
And I have some more questions. We have one from Philip Barlow. He's asking, does the work at a small scale happen the same way it does on a larger scale? It all feels like the work is more controlled, but I don't get that sense from small work. Or your work.
You know, if you go to the website, you'll see that the body of work incorporates a lot of different techniques and styles. It's just one of the things that I do. There are, you know, one school of painters that they kind of paint something along the same lines over and over, and then there's other painters that paint completely different things. So it's difficult to say that the techniques that I use in this group of small paintings is exactly what I would use throughout my career. It is more something that I would use when I'm in that particular mode of painting paintings in that style. So yes, the techniques, the actual techniques, brush and splatter and everything, I've used plenty of times on large and small, but it doesn't necessarily reflect everything that I do. So essentially what I do is I'll have some raw material paintings that end up looking like the whole painting, tear them all up, spread them out on a table, and then piece them back together, glue them onto another larger piece of paper, and that becomes the collage piece. And so it's the act of picking and choosing the torn pieces to create something that I consider as a real painting, and the result is the last 3 paintings in the show.
We have one more question from Glenn Marcus. He's asking you to please explain the derivation of remember XYZ, which is a lovely phrase, and your website.
So, remember XYZ happened when websites started. So it's particularly old. And I was going to a lot of clubs and seeing a lot of live music and being around crowds, kind of a foreign concept right now, but and I just kind of decided, you know what, I wasn't really thinking of trying to create a legacy of artwork but at the time, but I came up with this idea of, well, if you can remember XYZ, you can find me again. So picture yourself in a crowd, concerts, and people all around, and you have a really cool conversation. And the last thing I say to them is, look, if you can remember X, Y, Z, you can find me again. Because obviously it's a website, there's a contact us page, um, and so it was a way of just kind of leaving a calling card, an oral, an audio calling card with somebody in real life that would lead them back to me. And then there's another thing that's kind of in the mix, and that's Moses Hawk. Moses Hawk is a pseudonym that came from when a group of us bought and renovated a building on M Street between 4th and 5th on M. And that had a really pivotal part of my life. That was, the artist was full of artists, the building was full of artists, and I gleaned an incredible amount of information from my experience of being around them and doing things with them. And so I was the painter guy in the Mohawk. And at one point, I was standing in my raw space with the plywood floors and the beams around me, and I was getting a phone for the space. And this was so long ago, it was C&P telephone, for those of you that remember that. And I was signing up for a phone, and I told the lady that, I didn't want to pay for an unlisted number. And she goes, oh, that's no problem. Just make up a name and we'll bill you, Gary. And I just kind of on the fly I looked down the hall and it was just construction everywhere and it was a big mess. And the name we already knew of the building was called the Mohawk. And I said, oh, well, how about Moses Hawk? Mohawk for short. And so I carried that for many, many years. I had Moses Hawk and I was getting credit card offers for Moses Hawk, and it was a big joke. And when social media happened, many, many years later, social media happened. And I was with a friend, and he was kind of telling me, you should really start doing this social media stuff. It's like it's going to happen. This was a long time ago. This was like in the early 2000s. And I just said, okay, well, I'm a little leery of doing it with my name. So I'll just put this Moses Hawk guy and he'll do it. And so my Twitter and my Instagram and everything else became Moses Hawk, and to this day it does. And so some people know me as Moses and some people know me as Gary. That's the story behind it.
It's not just scale that's absent/ambiguous in the virtual real, but texture. I've seen this in person, but the texture doesn't translate digitally. How important is that to you?
Yeah, as I mentioned before, it's absolutely critical to any painter to, go beyond the two-dimensional digital thing. You don't get any of the aspects. I mean, one of the favorite things that painters do when they're looking at other painters is they want to kind of see how they did what they did, and especially it's kind of a favorite thing. They like to see what was the last thing that the painter did on the painting. I've seen that written up many, many times. It's just a kind of a funny thing that a painter will do when they're looking at another painting. And you can't get that in a two-dimensional setting, in a digital setting. You just can't do it. And so it's a frustrating, hopefully temporary situation, and we continue to paint and do what we can to kind of get through the pandemic new life. But be forewarned, coming out on the other end, life is going to be different. It's going to be significantly different. things that we do and say and are can be completely different. And one of the dynamics of this pandemic is the length of time that it's taken to get through it. It allows for your forgetting old ways of doing things. And so had this only lasted a week or two, everybody would just go back to what they were doing. But because this is so severe, and your daily lifestyle and your daily way of thinking and doing things is so complemented to what we're going through, it won't, we won't be able to just pick back up and do exactly what we were doing before. Even if the pandemic were to be completely solved and come July, it's, you know, everything, okay, go back to normal, it's all completely gone, it's eradicated, there is no going back to it anymore. So what that does for, in a lot of instances, is it creates a tremendous amount of opportunity. And so while a lot of people are kind of holding on to what is existing now, there's a lot of other people that are looking forward and they're grabbing all this opportunity that's in front of us. And the reason it's so fertile is that a lot of people aren't really moving towards that opportunity, and so there isn't much competition to new ideas and new ways of dealing with people and creating businesses and lifestyles and all that. So, on one hand, we're letting go of one thing and we're going to experience something completely different. We'll see what happens. But yes, I hate people looking at my paintings digitally.
We have another question from Carrie Joels.
Hi, Carrie from Tulsa.
When you start a work, do you begin from an emotional basis or a visual impulse?
I ruminate an idea for a painting. This is very typical of a lot of painters. I ruminate an idea of like, oh yeah, I can do this, I can do that. And then as soon as it becomes kind of something I'm going to take action with, then it becomes problem solving. How am I going to do this? How am I going to stop the paint from dripping too far because that'll ruin what I'm thinking? And how it becomes what really the impulse is. It's like the idea of, oh, I'm going to be using, colored pencils or really runny paint or really viscous, thick paint or something. That becomes kind of the spark in your head of what you're about to achieve. That's what your intent is. And sometimes the intent is for something that's kind of laborious and you have to kind of really do something over and over and over because that's what the image dictates. But in some cases it's very instantaneous and it's very serendipitous. So you get the idea in your head and then it becomes this problem solving. How am I going to execute what it is that's thinking in my head? And one of my mentors, clearly a mentor, Tom Nakashima, used to tell me this, and he told me this very early on, and it stuck with me. You have an idea, and you're trying to do it, and those aren't going to come here. They're going to come here. Your idea and you doing it. And where you meet it, it's going to be somewhere along that trajectory, but it's not going to be, you're not going to get exactly what you wanted to be. And so you have to kind of put that into your way of thinking, that you embrace where those two things meet. And he taught me that very early, and I continue to use that in my way of thinking.
And we have a question from Michael Sullivan. The Pollock-esque action painting is associated with such muscularity and the use of the whole arm. How does painting in this style at a reduced scale change the outcome?
Well, very simple. I am using full range of motion. I'm not painting those paintings in the size that you see them. I'm painting them in a much larger scale and cutting them down to what you see. And so I am using full range of motion and throwing things across the room and scraping things and doing things that typically I do on a larger painting, larger setting. But in this instance, I'm cutting them down to, again, create these kind of door opening little paintings that are super affordable. And it's just a way of getting people to notice me, and it's just another way of doing what I'm doing.
We have a question from Marjorie Myers. How do you choose your color scheme?
That's purely intuition. I surround myself with colors and I intuit what it needs. It's a kind of a metamorphosis of an idea, and over time, trial and error, this works, that doesn't work, and it just feeds the painting. So I'll be in the throes of it and I'll decide, okay, it needs this. And it's purely an intuition.
We have a question from Patricia Gosley.
Pat?
What does super affordable mean?
You won't see it in auction at Southwood. I wanted to offer a salutation, a cheer to everybody. Stigaboo, Stitchaboo, Stitchaboo. And it is a way of honoring Mother Earth and all the bounty that she brings. And I'm wishing peace to everybody come next week.
Thank you, Gary, for being so candid and open with us today and for taking the time to do this. Just a reminder to everybody, Gary's exhibition in our Nano gallery will be available. It's currently on display until January 17th, 2021. Remember, if you buy an artwork, you get an awesome catalog with it as well. And yeah, hope to see all of you in our gallery in the coming months, and we'll be here. Thank you, everybody. And just a reminder, our website is www.dcartcenter.org. You can send us any questions to our info@dcartcenter.org. My name is Armando Lopez. I'm General Manager, and we hope to see you all around. Have a good night, everybody.
Peace.